That was part of the reason why we didn't launch the campaign earlier or sooner. Was one, hey, prove it out first. So we actually tested in 3 cities before we launched it nationally, one. And then 2 is we also didn't want to take off some of we didn't want to speak to our consumer. We wanted to be part of their journey, if you will, in discovering this brand. Because one of the things we also uncovered through our consumer work was that there was a sense of pride for our consumer to discover the brand on their own and then actually pay it forward by introducing it to other friends. Like, they loved that. So bartenders were big fans of, hey, look, have you tried this Modelo beer? Like, this is a great beer. You should have it. And so it's just, we were like, okay, let's not mess that up. Let's not all of a sudden come over the top and, big ad campaign and, do like other brands. And so we also wanted to find the right moment to do that and how to bring that to life.
Welcome to Over a Pint, where we focus on the fast-paced, never-changing world of marketing told through the eyes of industry veterans with decades of in-the-trenches experience. No theory here. This is real-world, practical experience told to you by those that have been there, and that does include our guests. So grab a pint of your favorite local brewski or whatever your choice of drink may be, and join us for the show. As always, today I'm joined by my co-host, Pat McGovern, new biz director and award-winning digital shop here in Milwaukee. BrianM, president at Celtic, a full-service award-winning ad agency headquartered in Milwaukee's historic Third Ward neighborhood. And I am Kurtl, vice president at Celtic. So, gentlemen, today we are fortunate to have Mr. John Alvarado join us on Over a Pint. And where to even begin when trying to properly introduce and set up John, but I'll take a crack at it. Talented, driven, and a leader. This is a person that has a strong passion for strategy, advertising, multicultural advertising, brand building. John is a great example of someone that has and is truly climbing the corporate ladder. He's been impressive to watch for sure. Specifically, John has been a huge part of driving commercial success for Constellation Brands, Miller Brewing, Beam Brands, and Leo Burnett Fortune 500 clients. Over the past 14 years, John was a part of elevating Constellation's beer portfolio, whether that was leading the charge and shifting brands from regional to national, revitalizing a brand, or being a part of a successful product launch. Specifically, I'm referencing Corona, Modelo, Pacifico, beer-related brands and products, and those are some biggies. And on top of that, John brings some heavy-duty knowledge and experience in U.S. Hispanic and Latin America markets, which John, I do want you to touch on when we get into the conversation. But beyond that, I will say this, and I can say that with all sincerity, John just gets it. It really wouldn't matter what industry we're talking about, beer, auto, manufacturing, healthcare, tourism. His talents and expertise and experiences have been and are transferable and would 100% benefit any brand or client that he represents. So I will say it is great to have him on. It's an honor. John, welcome to Over a Pint.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. That was an awesome introduction. I'll have to pay $20 when we see each other next. It's a pleasure to be here. Anytime we can have a conversation over a good beer, I'm always for it. So
that's awesome. Well, let me transition to that, because as you're taking a sip of your beer there, we do have a tradition on our show. This show is called Over a Pint, where we talk about marketing over a pint of beer. So, John, I saw you kind of take a sip there. I kind of know already what you are drinking, but for our listeners, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking a Modelo Especial. Wonderful brand from obviously Mexico, great heritage, good tasting liquid, and one of the most exciting brands, actually the most exciting brand in the beer industry today. Last year it finished up as the #2 beer brand in all of the U.S., only trailing one brand, and that is an amazing run that I'd be happy to share as we have this conversation.
Wow. Well, we will get into that. Mr. McGovern, what are you drinking today?
I'm doubling down. I'm right with John. I'm going with the Modelo Especial. myself, got that right here. And I'm anxious to hear about this story, John. You've got me intrigued, brother.
Brian, what do you got?
Kurt, you can skip right over me because I'm lame. I've got water right now.
Okay, no worries.
I apologize for my lameness, but I just haven't had a chance to grab a beer just yet. So we're sticking with water.
No worries. Well, I'll tell you what. So I'm going to stick with the party here. I, too, am having a Modelo. I'll tell you what. I have not had one of these in a while, John. Full transparency, but let me take a sip. That's good. It's got a caramely taste, kind of a darker lager. It's every bit as good as I remember it being. A very good beer. And if I remember, too, it goes good with a lot of food, too. You can pair this thing up and have a little party, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Modelo Negro is a great beer. Actually, Mexico's only one of the few dark beers that actually has thrived outside of its home country.
Yeah.
One of my favorite food pairings with Modelo Negra, the darker beer Modelo, is actually Thai food. The spiciness in Thai food brings out the chocolate notes that are in Negra Modelo.
Yeah, it's
supposed to try it.
It's good. It's got that caramel. Like I said, it's a darker lager. But it's got a kind of a caramely kind of something going on. It's good. Yeah, it's very good. So, all right. Well, let's get this started. John, I think the easiest place to start is by breaking the ice a little bit, as we do with most of our guests. And I think if you can, take a couple minutes, take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever, break it down. Tell us your story from 100,000 feet.
Yeah, sure. So my story. So overall, 25 years plus in advertising and marketing, working on some awesome brands, which I'll get into. Father of 3, and married still for going on almost 30 years.
Wow.
So I've had quite a life so far, and looking forward to what's to come. Professionally, I'll dive in there a little bit. So started my career at Burnett, where I worked there for 8 years in account management, working on blue chip clients like Procter & Gamble, McDonald's International, Maytag, and General Motors, which actually is where Kurt and I first got to know each other. So I had a great run there and learned a lot of good things, but really, 2 key takeaways that I am grateful for having the experience was, one, really understanding building brand fundamentals. So how do you build brands and the key aspects to that? And then working with such great clients, putting that to work was awesome. And then 2 is the power of creativity in terms of storytelling and putting out content that people actually want to care about and really buy your brand. So had a great run there, and then decided to go client side, so to speak, where I got a call for an opportunity to go into what I'll call chapter 2 of my life, of my professional career, which was going to Jim Beam. At the time, really interesting portfolio, underdeveloped with multicultural consumers. And so job 1 that I had was to build out a business case and plan for how to build a portfolio with multicultural consumers. And after pulling that together and selling that in and getting the organizational buy-in and investment, so to speak, we made it happen. And I got to work specifically on Jim Beam bourbon, as well as some of the other brands in the bourbon portfolio. And then also De Kuyper, which is a line of cordials and liqueurs, 56 liqueurs and cordials.
Wow.
So we really got to understand the power of flavors. And this was back in the early 2000s when flavors were taking off across vodka, as well as obviously in drinks. And so had a wonderful experience there, but then got a call for an interesting position at Miller Brewing Company, which is, I'll call chapter 3. I got into the beer business. So started my beer career, if you will, at Miller Brewing Company, where I worked on MGD as well as Miller High Life and the introduction of a product at that point in time called Miller Chill, which was a light beer with hints of lime and salt. So think about a very light michelada or chilada. It was before its time, so did okay, but frankly got pulled off the shelf a couple of years after. But then moved over from there over to what's today's Constellation Brands. So made the jump to Constellation Brands, which has a great portfolio of Modelo, as we're drinking today, Corona, which everyone knew at the time, as well as Pacifico, and then other craft beers, Four Corners out of Dallas, as well as Funky Boot in Florida. So really, I mean, as a marketer, I joined because of the rich clay that the brands had from which to build and really elevate this portfolio to new levels, which I was able to do. And then also was able to build out the team. So we went from a group of 20 or so marketers to today it's well north of 200.
Wow.
And that was all tied to how to, building the needs or addressing the needs of the business in terms of, we added on new capabilities like an insights team, analytics team, innovation, field marketing, all the wonderful things that you need to win in the beer industry, if you will. And so really proud of those achievements. But if you boil it down, most proud of the fact that we were able to go on a winning streak coming out of the Great Recession. We put together a winning streak of 44 consecutive quarters of growth.
Wow.
And I have to tell you that the industry has been down for almost 20 years. So we outperformed the category substantially and almost tripled our market share during the time that I was at Constellation Brands.
Wow. And I want to get into, I want to spend a lot of time on your time on those brands, on the Corona, Modelo, but you kind of answered one of the questions I had ready to go earlier on when you gave us the overview, John. I was going to ask you, obviously your career started on the agency side, almost just shy of a decade at Leo Burnett, and you got into it. You said, this is what I learned: brand building fundamentals, the importance of creativity. I mean, you were around that. That was infused into the culture. When you left, and because that was pretty much, for the most part, that was your agency, you went from the agency to the client, what other intangibles did you, I'm trying to think how to ask this, what are the things that you learned that you liked or maybe that you didn't like, or maybe that didn't resonate with you so much from the agency side, that when you went to the client side, that knowledge was ready to go because you kind of knew. It's like, I know what it's like to work over there on the agency side. This is what I like, and these are the things I don't like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it does make sense, Kurt. What I would tell you is beyond, learning how to build brands as well as the power of creativity, I also took away a great appreciation for how the work gets done, right? So the creative development cycle in the process, as well as a respect and appreciation for being really singularly focused on what you're trying to say as a brand, right? So that goes back to the brief, if you will, as a tool. But really, what we all are trying to do in terms of brand building is you got to have one story to tell. And how do you tell it? Like being very clear, because there's a lot of noise in the marketplace. So that was something I definitely took away and impressed upon my agency partners throughout my client-side career, if you will. The other part I would say is a great respect for building teams and respecting each individual's contribution. Because when you're in an agency environment, as you gentlemen know, there's different functions that are represented, from account management to creative to strategic planning, production, business affairs. They all might have different names at different agencies, but essentially everyone needs to pull their own weight for things to really work and for creative ideas to really basically flourish and come to life. And so when I went client side, I always treated my agencies as partners. And I, not only myself, but I nurtured that in my team and fostered that in my teams to, hey, look, let's treat them as partners. Invite them to, over communicate, collaborate with them, but also give them the room to run. And so sometimes, particularly as I got more senior at Constellation, my role was to put our agencies in a position to succeed by simply letting ideas nurture a little bit or germinate for a little while, not try to, I always ask my team, okay, what are we trying to accomplish today? Like today, we're not looking to buy the final idea. Today is to see if we've got an idea that we want to put some energy around and, allow the team to spend more of their time and effort bringing to life. And so let's make sure we evaluate creative ideas with that filter today. And then, every step of the process requires a different evaluation, if you will, by really trying to bring my knowledge of how, good ideas can come to life, as well as how partnership can really work between clients and agencies.
Hey, John, let me thank you so much for being on the show. I'm totally pumped that you're here. I mean, a person with your status is just amazing. I mean, this is really cool. Thanks a lot. I'd like for you just to tell our audience in just a line, when you talk about branding fundamentals, in your words, what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I chuckle because, we oftentimes as marketers can get full of ourselves, frankly, by trying to make it so complex. So one of the things is I encourage people to simplify things. And I mean by what I've learned in my career is you got to, first and foremost, really understand your brand. So really, there's the business understanding as well as what does the brand stand for, and really being sharp in that regard. Two is really having a deep consumer understanding. So invest in consumer insights, spend the time, go out and talk to consumers. Don't sit in an ivory tower. Like really feed your mind and your gut with consumer information. So as you're building your brand and bringing that brand story to life, you really know a lot about who you're trying to reach, and more importantly, can develop bring forward, I should say, compelling stories and narratives about your brand that are going to be relevant and resonate with the consumer. And don't just advertise to them, really bring them on the journey of the brand and tell them the brand story so that they can get involved. And then third, I would tell you, is brand strategy, consumer understanding. And then the third part is really activate the brand around a big idea, which we all talk about, but try to do it in fresh and meaningful ways. And that's, what I would call my simplistic version of brand building fundamentals.
Interesting. John, when we've had a chance to talk to a number of people that have gone from agency to client, and there's a couple themes that come up here and there, some parallels, but one that seems to come up now and then is speed. And you kind of hit on a couple things where it's like, we want to be smart. We want to make sure we're taking the right steps, being fundamental. But at the same time, we also can't be guilty of, like you said, sitting in an ivory tower and overthinking this to its depth. I mean, at some point there's a need to move. When you went to the client side, was that something that you saw a difference in? Because I mean, I've had conversations with you, and you have an entrepreneurial streak in you. Can you speak to that a little bit? How the game has changed a little bit, where now it's like sometimes you have to move too. Like the acceleration pace has quickened. We can't think about this forever.
Yeah, I would say to that, Kurt, would be so when you're on the client side, one of the things I realize is and if you're as passionate as I am about building brands and really the business itself, or I'll say it this way: if you're as passionate, which most of us are when we wake up in the morning, to winning, you're constantly thinking about how to win. And so that's where the speed to having a bias for action and then moving with a disciplined sense of urgency really comes to play. So what I mean specifically about that is your clients or brand leaders, let's call them that. Brand leaders are constantly thinking about their business and thinking about what needs to be done and how to put results on the board. You're measured, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. You're constantly looking at sales results. And so as a client, you want to move with a sense of urgency, but you want to do it and you should do it when you have enough information to act. So one of my philosophies that I adopted on the client side, where I had the power to do so, was to fail forward. So not a new concept, but really to apply it, you need to have courage, as well as, so like you said, don't overthink it. Mm-hmm. So, act with what you know today and learn from it. What you've done might have worked or it might not have worked, but either way, it's successful to move forward as long as you learn from it and reapply what you learned. And so not to be worried about perfection, because perfection is never going to be achieved, frankly. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things I loved about being in the beer industry, frankly, is over the last 15 plus years that I've been in the beer industry, 14 being at Constellation recently, it's a dynamic industry. Something is happening every day. A competitor is launching a new product, or you're gonna introduce a new campaign, or bars are opening up, and you want to be the first to be there and try to get some distribution, get your beer on tap or whatever it be. There's a certain dynamic aspect to the industry that I loved, and therefore I would impress upon my team of marketers, like, hey, you got to move what you know. And sometimes, you might not have all the information that you'd like to have, but again, having a bias for action is going to get you closer to winning than trying to spend more time thinking about it.
Well, let's get into some of these specifics, because obviously, let's break it down from theory to some of the real experiences that you've had and the brands that are going to mean something and that are pretty impressive to a lot of our listeners. So you get to Constellation, and you've got a nice portfolio of some brands that you're responsible to work with. Give us an example. Let's talk about a case study. Let's talk about an example where John shows up, and whether it was a challenge you're most proud of, or where you really made that dent, John, and you came up with that big idea, something fresh, something relevant, something that differentiated, whatever it might be. Let's talk about some of those mini case studies and break that theory to a real brand example.
So great. Let me just so quickly to kind of set the stage, if you will. When I first got to Constellation Brands, it was 2007, and at that point in time, the only brand in the portfolio that really was a household name was Corona. And even me being in the beer industry prior to that, like, the only brand I knew in their portfolio was Corona. But there was these nuggets called Modelo, Pacifico, and some other brands in the portfolio that I was like, those are interesting. So my first challenge that I put my theory to work on, so to speak, and applied to drive success was on Pacifico. Pacifico was a brand I knew nothing about, and most consumers didn't in the U.S., but really had a strong foothold in Southern California. And so as I got smarter about the business and smarter about the consumer, really transformed that from a brand that only people in Southern California cared about to now it has, reached the East Coast, so to speak, of the U.S. And so really along the way, and Pacifico, by the way, was one of the least invested brands in the portfolio, right? So job one was get Corona done. Job two was get Corona done. Job three was get Corona done. And everything else was secondary. And so with Pacifico, I was the last guy on the total poll, so to speak, that got any budget and so forth. But, going back to one of your questions earlier, had a great agency partner that knew how to operate with crafty, I'll call it, and creatively. And really, we got into, pick your metaphor, in the boat together, and really understood what the business was about as well as what we could do. And sure enough, this was before digital was a real big thing. Pacifico was a digitally led brand, and today still is. Everything starts with digital, and then that mainly has to do with the consumer that we're going after. But then everything else came after that. So we had a very digitally oriented marketing plan that was complemented with local events, local media, and sure enough, that brand has more than doubled in size during my time at Constellation. And so really fun, exciting brand to be a part of, as it just had this coolness to it that was just unbelievable in terms of when you did find that what we call the the journeyman in women. That's what we call our target consumer. Man, they really cared about that brand, and the brand would resonate with those new consumers as we brought it east. And so that was a great success story. So from there, I got tapped to work on Modelo Especial, or Modelo is at that. And at that point, this is 2010, if you will, and no one really knew about Modelo. And I mean, externally, outside of California, no one also, knew about Modelo. And it was a brand that was about 20-something million cases. And as I did my due diligence in looking at the brand and the consumer information and getting smarter in those regards, really understood that, wow, we have this brand in our portfolio that's amazing, and it has this great power to really grow up to be something big. And so I also got to say, internally, the belief that our organization, as well as our distributors and retailers, had was that it was a niche brand that was great for Hispanics. And that showed in the numbers. In 2010, 90% of the consumers that drank Modelo were Hispanics, which most of them were of Mexican descent. But I saw the power of this brand and what it could do in terms of what its story is, as well as how we could bring it to life that could be meaningful. And so laid out a vision, actually a bold vision, to go from 20 million cases to becoming a 100 million case brand in 10 years. And for perspective, there have only been 17 beer brands that have eclipsed the 100 million case mark in the industry throughout its whole history.
Wow.
And so, I was setting up this bold ambition, but I did all the work to understand that from a consumer perspective, as we recruit, there's this huge pool of consumers that we could, self-made men and women that we could recruit to come into the brand, while also retaining our core Hispanic consumer, which was just growing leaps and bounds. I mean, for another nugget, Hispanics have grown since 2010 to today. There's been 1 million Hispanics turning age 21 year over year since 2010. And I could see it in the forecast back then. And so clearly you could see, wow, there's a consumer story in terms of franchise of how we can build this out. And then also from a commercial perspective, there were a lot of levers that we could pull in terms of new channels, new geographies, new packaging, or packages, excuse me, that really, to me, gave me the confidence that we could build this brand into 100 million cases. And so sure enough, the idea that we struck from a marketing standpoint, which is still in the marketplace today, which is this whole idea of the fighting spirit.
Oh, yeah.
And this brand story around the fighting spirit, and it really embodying that, goes all the way back to its history in Mexico and kind of how it came to be. And so that's the story that has resonated with consumers, and that we built the brand on. In 2017, the brand eclipsed the 100 million case mark. And actually at the end of 2021, so the end of last year, it is now the number 2 brand in the industry. So it's well over that now. And it grew 13.5% last year. So it's growing double digits off of a big base. From a consumer perspective, it went from being 90% of the consumer franchise being Hispanic or Hispanic consumers to today it's 50-50, 50% Hispanic, and still growing, by the way, and 50% we'll call it non-Hispanic. So really awesome to be a part of that ride. And then I also had the privilege and the responsibilities, I reminded myself day and up, to then get, revitalize the iconic Corona brand. So because of the success I was having and driving on Modelo, I should say, with my team, I was asked to help revitalize the Corona brand. Corona brand was struggling and become too mainstream. Many people in the industry thought it had reached the end of its life cycle, its brand life cycle, excuse me. And so that was the challenge as I took on that brand. And sure enough, with my team, we got smarter about it and really made a pivot in the strategy that allowed us to recruit the next generation of drinkers for Corona, that got the core back to being healthy, but then also we launched new products off of that trademark that, frankly, a lot of people were like, don't do it. Yeah. You're going to mess it up. And we were like, no, we have confidence based on our consumer research and we test marketed these new ideas before we launched them at a national level. And sure enough, they are now have grown, they've been highly incremental to the brand's portfolio, and then really thrived in the marketplace today, growing double digits.
Wow. You know, John, it was interesting. You said earlier on when you had started your career there, priority number 1, Corona, priority number 2, Corona, priority number 3, Corona. I read an article today, and it was a really good article, and it was short read. The whole idea was how brands need to think as an underdog and be hungry. And I'm thinking about your experiences on Pacifico, the state of what Pacifico was when you arrived and where you took it. Kind of an underdog. We have some big mountains to climb. And then when you moved to Modelo, you know, kind of where you were and then what your goal was, you know, call it what it was. But right when you were describing it, I was thinking about that underdog mentality, that hunger, and you got to be hungry to be successful. And especially in this category, it's so competitive. It seems like, you know, that probably served you well in a way, you know, versus, you know, coming in and trying to build upon a fat cat versus like, no, we got to take the gloves off. We got to think differently, and we got to be hungry and do things differently and be fresh, and all those things you kind of alluded to earlier about, you know, the importance of taking a big idea and how it kind of comes to life.
Yeah, I love that, actually. I didn't even think about it until you said that. But the fact of the matter is even as a whole, our portfolio, we were a distant 4th player in the industry. And I'm sorry, Constellation was a distant 4th player in the industry when I first started with the organization. So there was this hunger that existed to really past, if you will, other suppliers. But really our hunger was to be the best organization and be the best at building these brands. And everyone was bought in on that. So we had an underdog spirit, but also a very one team, one dream culture that really allowed us to really push the ball up the hill, if you will, or the rock up the hill. And then, yeah, every brand situation I faced, it was with hey, we got a challenge. We got to overcome that. Let's get hungry. Let's roll up the sleeves. And that did allow us to do things differently, to think differently and do things differently. Even sometimes where people were like, no, you shouldn't do that. So an example of that is when I got on Corona, and again, this was we had to revitalize this iconic brand that was a big brand in the industry, by the way. And also the emotional flagship of Constellation. So a lot of the advice I got when I first got in that business was, don't, you know, just it's nice. Don't mess it up. Keep the steering wheel between 10 and 2. And I was like, no, that doesn't make sense to me. We're down. We're declining. At best case, we'll be flat. That's nothing to be excited about. Particularly when I got underneath it again and saw that there was an opportunity, actually, from a consumer perspective. We just needed to do things differently. So we modernized our marketing. And one of those examples of that was we relaunched the can. So while that seems like, oh, that's basic on the surface, the reality was when I first got in the Corona business, more than 90% of it's actually like 97% of its sales were done in that iconic clear bottle. Right. And our sales force told me a couple of times, like, look, we tried to relaunch the can a couple of times and we failed. Like, it didn't do well. Like, consumers don't want it. So I said, okay, that's fair. So my team and we did the work to actually say, no, the consumer actually doesn't even know we have a can. And they're actually saying, man, it would be nice for Corona to have a can for all those occasions that I have a Corona or want to have a Corona, right? And these occasions are the beach, boats, parks, festivals. And you're like, what brand is more perfect than Corona to be at those events in a can? Now, one of the things we uncovered was the can looked nothing like the rest of the brand. It was an ugly can, frankly. And so the graphics on it were terrible. And more importantly, consumers also, from an awareness perspective, didn't know it existed. So I got pushback at first, but really was able to sell in with consumer information and facts that, hey, this could be a meaningful driver of new business for us. And sure enough, we grew it from being 3% of our business to triple that while also not cannibalizing the bottle. It actually had a halo effect on the bottle. The bottle actually started to grow again. And so we were able to revitalize, the business through one of those, or the can being one example of doing things differently, as well as taking a whole new look at our marketing. So if you go back prior to 2009, it was the campaign that we all love and know, which is two people sitting on a beach just looking out at the horizon, right? Doing nothing. Well, for the new drinkers that we were trying to attract, that was meaningless to them. They're like, look, this is the millennial generation, by the way. This is almost 10 years ago. So they were just starting to come of age, if you will, in terms of their, who they were and becoming. And they were like, look, that's not how I live my life. Like, I live my life by wanting to reconnect with my friends and my family. And beer is certainly a part of that. And so we're like, wait a minute, Corona should be a part of those occasions. So we repositioned it strategically. And then the way we activated was our new advertising was showing those occasions where you could find your beach, right? The beach that you no longer had to go sit somewhere in some desolate beach down in Mexico, which is still beautiful, by the way. But you could have this on a rooftop, whether if you're in Milwaukee at your favorite bar or on the lake, there's these other places where the brand's essence could, take shape and take hold, and it could be, come to life, if you will. And so those are just a couple examples of, being an underdog, pulling up the sleeves and thinking differently and doing things differently.
Hey, John, I got a question for you, if you don't mind. Modelo Fighting Spirit. I think we're all very familiar with that ad campaign because I've seen it probably 6 times a week over the past year or so. What I'm curious about was taking it beyond the ad campaign. So now, what are those stories, like you keep saying, telling, compelling stories, things that people care about, engaging them in different ways? How did you do that once that campaign launched? Did you use those celebrities to do events? Did you, create content that explained the beer more and things of that? I'm just kind of curious about what happened after you launched it.
Yeah, it's a great question. What's interesting is actually Modelo. We didn't actually turn on our ad campaign until like 2017 or 20 around there. So it's probably it hasn't even been in the market a decade yet. We actually started. We uncovered the idea. First of all, we identified our consumer segment of self-made men and women, and that came through research and work that we had done. And what we learned about this target consumer and where what the brand brought forward was this whole idea of the fighting spirit, because Modelo had to fight every step of the way from its heritage down in Mexico to exist in a world, frankly, where Corona had this large halo. And not just, I'm not talking just internally, but in general, when you went down to Mexico or even in the US, when you asked for a beer from Mexico, 9 out of 10 times they gave you a Corona. Yeah. So Modelo had this fighting spirit inherently in the brand. We started to bring those stories to life more at the local and ground roots level first, before we even got to the campaign. And so some of the ways we made that happen were, yes, the campaign, but like I said, it came out later, but we did events, we did local media, we did some collaborations with some, we actually did a collaboration with some gritty artists, as not well known, just on the cusp of becoming big, along with a shoe partner. And we did this on-premise program, on-premise being in bars, if you will. And so that's how we really started to get this brand going. And digital and social started to become platforms that we could leverage too, before we even got to the advertising campaign. But once we got to the advertising campaign, that's when it really hit another gear.
Yeah.
And so to your question, once we put the advertising campaign, we started to ask ourselves, okay, where else can we bring the brand story to life? And so that's when we signed a deal with UFC. So we did a multi-year deal partnership with the UFC, which really embodies and actually brings to life the whole fighting spirit well. And then we also tapped into some of those celebrities that we first featured that were in the ad campaign. We started to bring them to life in other areas, like local appearances or through digital and social media. And then we also added a cause onto it as well. which we called the Fighting Chance Project, which was the brand's way of giving back in terms of helping people who needed, frankly, some support in terms of to help to fulfill their dreams and their ambitions. So we looked at other ways like that. We started to get into some other more collaborations with artists, but also brands that really spoke to our consumer and really tried to do it in fresh and meaningful ways.
I love it because I think a lot of people just generally think, oh, you just launch an ad campaign, right? Come up with some digital ads, put them into the market, maybe a TV spot, and we're done. And it's like, no, there's all these other layers of partnerships and activations and events and localizing things and partnering with people. There's so many facets to launch and maintain a brand. So it's neat to hear that story. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hey, John, I was just going to ask.
I think that's Kurt, let me just jump in here. I think this.
Please,
I just want
go
to dovetail this.
Yeah,
because it's really cool. You're right. I mean, you started building up momentum. You started before you ran the ad campaign, right? You started showing, here are the successes. Here's what we're going to do. We're not going to jump right into a big ad spend. Budget's part of it, right? We got to show our gaps. We got to kind of understand the landscape. Well done.
No, that was it was definitely we definitely had to prove we had to put the business case together. Like that was part of the reason of why we didn't do it. But we also, that was part of the reason why we didn't launch the campaign earlier or sooner. Was one, hey, prove it out first. So we actually tested in 3 cities before we launched it nationally. 1, and then 2 is we also didn't want to take off some of the. We didn't want to speak to our consumer. We wanted to be part of their journey, if you will, in discovering this brand. Because one of the things we also uncovered through our consumer work was that there was a sense of pride for our consumer to discover the brand on their own and then actually pay it forward by introducing it to other friends. Like they loved that. So bartenders were big fans of, hey, look, have you tried this Modelo beer? Like, this is a great beer. You should have it. And so it's just, we were like, okay, let's not mess that up. Let's not all of a sudden come over the top and, big ad campaign and, do like other brands. And so we also wanted to find the right moment to do that and how to bring that to life. And so we sharpened the advertising, if you will, and then launched it, I would say, probably at the exact right time, given the brand's momentum.
John, the question I was going to ask, and it kind of, when you talk about landscape, I mean, from a big picture perspective, how big can this pie get? I mean, we've had some beer guests on, we've had some, a reporter on that covers the beer industry. I mean, it's the landscape of the beer industry, how it looked 15 years ago, 16 years ago, 20 years ago to where it is now it's just unbelievable. With the emergence of craft and all these different types of, and then within the craft business, all the different types. I mean, at some point, where does it go? I think about all these new brands, these breweries coming in, trying to fight for a piece. And again, the pie at some point, I know that everyone has different tastes and, there's a consumer for everyone, but the pie is only so big. I mean, what's your take on what's happening and where it goes? And I mean, what are you seeing? I mean, it's
a great question. Trust me, kept me up many nights thinking about that. So, one of the things that we have to recognize is that beer is now fighting, or not fighting, but it's competing with not just beer, but with spirits, so liquor brands, as well as wine.
Yeah.
Consumers of today are drinking from each of those buckets, if you will, on any different occasion. So the blurring of the lines really the lines have become very blurred in terms between beer, wine, and spirits. So to that end, well, the good news is that everyone in the beer industry is really paying attention to the consumer and leading with the consumer. And what that's driving is the diversification that you described, Kurt, in terms of all the new products that are out there, the local breweries to the national players that are introducing new products to meet those different consumer needs. So I see that is going to continue. And I think what you're going to have more going forward is a continuation of new products being introduced to meet consumers' needs and desires and wants. And so you'll see the pie is not going to grow more as a whole between beer, wine, and spirits. I'm describing that pie. But within it, you're going to see different slices, if you will, in terms of, and they're going to change based on, they're going to evolve based on consumer preferences.
You know who else seems to be listening to, John, is tourism. Because if you go to, you go to any state's major tourism website, whether it's a North Carolina, Virginia, Michigan, states that you kind of associate with beer, they're talking about it. They recognize the fact that if you come to North Carolina, if you come to Virginia, if you come to Michigan, certain states, it's right there. It's like the beer circuit. That is such a big part of what's going on. It's not just about the product itself. It's tourism and how this is kind of just, has not forced, but has, driven people to certain destinations. It's kind of parlayed into different industries where it's, they're kind of playing off each other a little bit.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Kurt. And I think that's where the craft movement actually did a great job and was additive to the industry in the sense of really demonstrating the benefits and the stories behind beers, right? So it has captured the imagination of consumers in terms of what you could do with a beer, meaning the varieties that are offered from an IPA to, a low calorie beer to, all the wonderful products that are now available in different states and in the different breweries that have sprung up. I think that's one of the beauties of the craft movement. When at Constellation, we had 2 in our portfolio. We had Four Corners in Dallas and we had Funky Buddha in South Florida, and they're different. The founders had different ideas of what they wanted to bring to consumers, and they've achieved that. And they're now, magnets, to your point, for tourism. Like when tourists come to South Florida, they want to go stop by the Funky Buddha brewery, learn about, tell me more about Funky Buddha, and then have the experience around those different beers with their friends or their family that they're traveling with, right? So, and that's the other aspect that has really been awesome to see is how beer is bringing people together. The social nature of beer, which is awesome. It brings people together. Like there's nothing like sitting around like we're doing right now and having a conversation around beer. And if you can do that around new products as you're traveling around the country, that just strikes up, more conversation and gives you more reason for visiting any part of, this wonderful country.
Yeah. I'm not going to put you on the spot, so I'm going to ask this question in a positive way. So I'm not going to ask you who's doing it wrong, because I wouldn't do that to you, but who else is doing it right? And you and your teams have been a part of, and I didn't mention this earlier, but doing a little bit of homework on John, and it seems they've won their fair share of awards, very prominent awards. But aside from that, when you look at just the industry or whatever, what brands do you think are doing it right? You look at it, John, just as an average person at home, you're on the couch, it's like, and you see something, it's like, wow, that's cool. Aside from the science behind it, but like, I like what they're doing. Who's doing it right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I would, what I would say is, I think the industry as a whole is doing it better.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is, I think, like I said, I've seen it. The consumer is now at the forefront of how everyone's thinking about, what they're doing and how they're doing it and what they're bringing to the marketplace. So I love that suppliers are thinking about it, the consumer first and foremost. And therefore what it's doing is it's elevated the products to new levels, whether it be a new product or even the current products or long existing products. The marketing has certainly gotten better in terms of, national brands to local brands. I think, there's some great things happening, and it really is because everyone's now leading with the consumer versus their own personal bias or preference of what they think is right. And I think that has been a major shift in the industry over the last, 20 years. And so, that to me gives me pride in what the industry as a whole is doing, is how I would answer that question.
Fair enough. One of my final questions, I guess I want to ask is, when it comes to vertical and horizontal experience, obviously when you came to the client side, you were working with agencies. You came into the industry and, you were naming off earlier, John, some of the brands you touched for some big blue chip brands and industries. Beverage, whatever you want to call it, wasn't one of them. How important is that to getting to that big idea, to that great idea, to delivering on success? I mean, if you're dealing with an agency, how important is that? Is it about the vertical, or is it about the fact that you're looking for a team, whether it's your internal team or an outside team, a unit that has the ability to think and think fresh? I'm curious what your take on that is.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm sure there's differing points of view. My point of view and what I've learned, having been in, the alc bev industry and on the client side for almost 20 years now, is that I have found that what's been most important is that you have thought leaders who have a results orientation, is looking for key attributes in people that can help you to think as well as do really well. So anytime I recruited in my last role, so as I said, I built the team from 20 to 200 plus, it was with key attributes in mind. And beer experience or beverage experience was a nice to have. It wasn't, we didn't start with that. We started with our recruitment strategy was based on, in terms of finding new employees and team members, was based on how, people thought, how they carried themselves. Did they have a bias for action? How do they demonstrate that? Things like that. And that's some of the things that we look for in our agency partners. So the beverage experience is nice, but it's not a mandatory, if you will.
Okay. Very good.
John, if you mind, going a little deeper into the agency, right? You touched on that a little bit, the bias for action. I love that phrase. When we talked to Cristiano last time we were on the podcast, he talked about chemistry is a big deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've seen both sides of it. Talk to us about what you look for in an agency. So many good ones out there, right? And the game has changed a lot. I'd just love to get your take in on that.
Yeah, so our roster of agencies changed over the years. While I was at Constellation, I was there for 14 years, and we actually added agency resources to our business and our roster, if you will, during my time there. And many of the things that we looked for was, I'll tell you, strategic thinkers, bias for action, i.e. we don't have time to want to pontificate and sit in a room and philosophize for months or years for that matter. 3, chemistry is certain, and this is no particular order, but chemistry is definitely a part of it. And the key question there is, do I see myself, do I see myself in, having a beer with these people at the end of the day and liking it and enjoying it?
Yeah.
But more, as well as also, we're in the trenches together. Can I see, this team with me in the trenches? Because with the whole idea of fostering partnership between, my team and agencies, it really was, look, you're part of the team. You're not some, SWAT team that I call you on Monday or Tuesday. No, you're not physically sitting with me, but mentally, I'm hoping you're as engaged in my business as my, as I am in my team. And so that's where that partnership has to be, that chemistry, I should say, comes to really bear on, can they be really good partners with us? So that's definitely what I would say in terms of looking for agency partners. And I would be remiss, of course, are they creative? Because that's one thing we're not going to try and do internally. While some folks like to play creative, that was something I discouraged my team and I from frankly doing. We could be nurturers of good creative ideas, but really the power of creativity was going to first start with our agency partners.
Hey, John, on that last point, would you mind just giving us your philosophy on the creative portion of it? Again, were you a type of guy, or was your team like, hey, show us the big idea kind of finished? Or were you like more iterative? Like, give me a lot of ideas really fast. Let me just see where you guys are going. Let me get on with this. I want to check out your thinking and see if I'm vibing with any of these. Where did you fall in that?
Yeah, my philosophy and my approach was to, first and foremost, our responsibility as clients was to give a very sharp brief, right? So that no one was wasting their time or spinning their wheels. We were all very clear on what we needed to deliver. And we being us, the team members, the client side, but also our AC partners. So that was job one. And then job two is, in terms of how we worked most successful, was more of an iterative state in terms of, first come to me with a few ideas that you have a lot of heart and energy for in a conceptual form. And then let's agree on which ideas to continue to work on versus, come and give me a full dog and pony show. That's actually, I didn't like that at all, frankly.
What I like what you said is, I tend to agree. It's like, you've got to have the smarts, you have to have the creative thinking, but when you were talking about the trenches, who's in the trenches with me, who's willing to roll up their sleeves and do this with me? I know we say it at our agency a lot, and we always compare it to like a marathon. Marathons are grueling. They're not fun at times. You are running for a long period of time, but you better like the people you're running the marathon with, because if you do like those people, you get not to say that you're not going to have disagreements, not that there's going to be healthy dialogue along the way and disagreements, but if you enjoy, or as you said, John, this is someone I can have a beer with, you're going to get better success. Everything else from that is going to breed off that. And so I think you're spot on, and it's something that we 100% champion over here at our agency. And I will say,
the one thing I didn't say, but I would add to that was, in a spirit of partnership, was I impressed him on my team, like, look, this is going to be our agency partner for a while. We're not hiring for just a project. We're hiring for partners that we could, be in business with and partners with, frankly, for years. And at Constellation, we didn't have a lot of turnover on our agency roster. One, because of the approach we took in terms of first hiring and bringing people onto the team, but then also investing in those relationships as really be partners together. We're going to win together. We're going to lose some together. But hey, together, to your point, Kurt, we're going to finish the race, and we're going to be proud of the end product, but also proud of the wins that we're going to put on the board, because we're going to kick some ass along the way.
One of the things I think you're really good at, John, and you always have been, but I think you're good at, just listening to today's conversation and having past conversations, you're very good at the what and the how and breaking that out. There's a lot of, you have to, it's the old saying, it's like, you can have the best story, but if you don't know how to convey it, if you can't communicate that to whomever, whether it's us having a conversation right now, whether it's to your team, you're very good at the communication, and you break it down in a very comfortable and in a way that it's like, yeah, we're kind of in this together versus I'm here and you're here. It's very much, I sense that with you, and I think that is, it's not something you see all the time. And it might be part of your no BS type of approach, which is, I think, refreshing and probably what's made you very successful throughout your career, because that is a part of your DNA. But it's you're very good at not just the what, but the how. John, as is always the case with our guests as we wrap up, since you are our guest, the final words are yours. The stage is yours. Plug whatever you want to say, or whatever we didn't ask you. This is your moment to shine. Whatever is on your mind.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, look, what I would just say, and kind of what we started with, right, which was this is a conversation over a pint of beer. And the beers that we all are drinking today happen to be Modelo. But the reality is brands are really at the center of brands have a role in our lives. And beer just is one category that frankly carries a bit more badge value in terms of its role in consumers' lives. And so one of the things I've always loved is the fact that whether, whoever you are, a brand has meaning to you, and we as marketers and advertisers should take on that responsibility seriously and be committed to providing the best brands that we can for consumers. Because there's a lot of wonderful brands, not just in beer, but across the, categories that we get to wake up every day and work on, and we should take that pride and that responsibility on, every day with the same commitment that we would do anything else, if not more. So I'm a brand guy, so I'm going to say that. But really, I would also tell you that I think it's one of the most exciting times to be a marketer, if you will, or an advertiser right now, because there's so much fun to be had. There's rich clay from which to create from, as well as also there's more consumer contact points or connections that we as marketers and advertisers can work through today, but also even create. And so that's what I would tell you as we wrap up today.
Well, I will say this, and I mean this genuinely. It's been fun to watch your career. You've done some very impressive things, and what lies ahead is even more exciting. It's been a pleasure to just watch what you've been doing, and can't thank you enough for joining us on the podcast, for sharing your insights and having a beer with us, as you like to say, and it's been a lot of fun. So thank you very much, John. It's been awesome having you on the podcast. And on that note, everyone, this has been Over a Pint with John Alvarado. Till next time, cheers.
Salud.
Cheers. Cilantro.